Hey everybody, welcome to the start of a two-part series from the Zaft Lending Report. Pete, what do we have?
So today we're going to talk about what is a comp. We're going to bring in Nelson Whitfield, one of our appraisers, and kind of go over like what is and what is not a comp. Hope everybody kind of get a feel for when you're trying to figure out what the value is, what are some do's and don'ts as far as what you're kind of looking to comp it to, and as far as what is a comp.
Hello, I'm Nelson Whitfield, real estate appraiser. Do a lot of work with Pete and his team. Glad to be here.
Nelson, thanks for being here. So in today's episode, we're going to use the term comp a lot. And so what is a comp? What is a comp sale on the appraisal? And, structurally, what is a comp?
That's a great question. Because the key idea is the term comparable. So when you're considering a comp, you want the most similar property that has sold. Fannie Mae allows us to go up to a year. And so what comparable properties do is they establish a range of value. So once we adjust each comparable sale to the subject, we establish a range of value, and then those comparables give a value indication for the subject, and somewhere in that range we can reconcile those values to where we say the property is worth X amount.
Some of the questions I frequently get from buyers and or agents when they're writing contract is renovated houses versus new construction. So you see a lot of times house that's been remodeled, and can you comp that to new construction, or what has to happen for that to be a new construction be a comp?
It's difficult to take an older house that's been renovated and compare it to a new house because you've got functional differences. The ceilings will be higher, the roof pitches will be different, stuff like that. If you have basically rebuilt a house, then it becomes much more comparable to a newer house, and it makes more sense to compare those. So the main thing you're looking for is similarity of function.
If they've just redone the kitchen, redone the master bathrooms, and put new hardwood flooring in, you really can't just necessarily comp a 1990s house to new construction if they've just remodeled rooms and flooring.
Typically, no. And you can see the value differences in the two. That being said, what we're trying to do is reflect the market. And so if that kind of thing is typical in that market, like for instance, over in 12 South, you see a lot of that. And have to preserve the historical nature of the original house, but they add on in the back or make changes that, that market would accept that as a new house, then you can make a more comparable argument to using that sale as a comparable property.
How about like another thing I get is when you've got a house that has, let's say, a big barn that's really nice or detached structure that's really nice, but there are no other structures or no other houses that have that. How do you put a value on if that's the only one that has that extra?
That becomes tricky. A lot of times in that case, we're sort of dealing with Fannie Mae guidelines. Not that Fannie Mae owns the appraisal process, but they do have requirements as to what we can do and what we can't. And in a case like that, when you're going to end up with an across-the-board adjustment, if you've got a barn that's, say, $200,000 barn, and you adjust $200,000 across the board, then what an underwriter is going to want is some kind of evidence that the market recognizes that much value to that barn. So what you have to do is either go further out to find some evidence as to this kind of structure adds this kind of value to this property. Because if you're in a situation where the market doesn't accept an improvement like that, and you give it a lot of value, then you could be way off. So it may be that somebody spends a lot of money on an improvement like that, but the market doesn't pay for it, and so you can't give it a lot of value.
When you say across-the-board adjustments, on the appraisal, you've got comp 1, comp 2, comp 3 on the main page.
Right.
And you're saying there in each comp has adjustments, right? Like that,
right.
More or less square footage,
right.
Bedrooms, bathrooms, differences that adjust that So you take the prior sale top number,
Right.
and it gets adjustments up and down to come up with the bottom value.
Right.
And across the board means you do a line item on all three comps because that didn't have what the subject does. And if that single adjustment is too big, out of tolerance, that's what's going to kick it out.
Right. And sometimes you'll see that on lots where, a subject property has a superior lot amenity, maybe size, maybe view, whatever it is. But you have to come up with some way to document that an improvement or an amenity or a lot aspect, some kind of evidence that gives value if you're going to adjust every comp in a certain, in a positive way for that one thing. That's a red flag that Fannie Mae's just requires some sort of documentation as to how you came up with that value.
So it just can't be an assumption. The market has to
Right.
document, and is that usually through prior sales?
Yeah, prior sales, or like I say, I mean, even if you have to go further out or over a year back, maybe it doesn't fit the guidelines as a comp, but it does give you some basis for making that adjustment.
And when we're talking about Fannie Mae, there's Fannie, there's Freddie, and there's FHA, and there's jumbo loans. But even the jumbo loans still follow the Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac guidelines.
Right.
So all those are pretty much going to be universal type guidelines.
Right.
When it comes to age and comp sales.
Right.
One last question on the comp sales. There's data now is stored. So if you're in a subdivision or in a neighborhood where you've got a lot of comp sales, am I correct to say if it's just one outlier that sold for really cheap or an oddity, you can overlook that. The computer may flag it, the
Right.
double check system. But if there's a lot of activity that doesn't support your value and you try to ignore all that activity,
Right.
we're going to get caught on that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, they've got all the data. In fact, they may have more data than I have because they'll have an appraisal in their database that didn't ever go to market. Property wasn't on the market. But fundamentally, when they run it through their computer system, it's going to pick out what comps they think should be used. And if those aren't what I used, they're going to want to know why. If there is an outlier, what we can do is include it, but we don't have to give it a lot of weight. We put it in the analysis to say we considered it. Fannie Mae likes that. They're like, okay, as long as you considered it, if you decided it doesn't need weight, it's okay. But we just want to make sure you looked at it.
And just for all the viewers, Fannie, Freddie, and all the agencies, every appraisal that Nelson does or any appraiser does goes through an automated computer system and it stores the data. So even like to your point of that never may have been on the market. So if it's a new construction house or somebody bought that house, that data is stored on that first sale. If it's been in the past, let's say 14, 15 years,
Right.
What was the square footage? What was the condition? Everything about that house.
Mm-hmm.
And so it knows what's out there and especially if it's recently sold.
Right.
And that's where that becomes really more problematic is townhomes and condos, right? Because a lot of those are almost identical.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden one outlier tries to go higher.
Yeah.
That can be problematic.
Because sometimes, I'll get a underwriter that comes back, Fannie Mae wants to know, other appraisers said this. You didn't say that. Why not? And I'm like, I don't know. The appraiser could say whatever he wants to. I'm just telling you, this is the way I look at this property.
All right. Well, thank you, sir. I appreciate that. And hopefully that helps you guys with what is a comp. And make sure you subscribe to the Zaft Lending Team YouTube channel and stay tuned for another episode with Nelson. We're going to talk about addos, dados, and basements.